Jake Morrison returned from the hunt simulation to find that everything at the academy had changed. Other cadets looked at him differently now, and conversations stopped when he entered rooms. The casual dismissal he had experienced during his first months had been replaced by something that resembled fear. Kyle Peterson was waiting in their shared quarters when Jake arrived. "Morrison, we need to talk," Kyle said, and his tone was more serious than Jake had ever heard. Jake sat on his bunk and waited for Kyle to explain what was troubling him. "The Academy staff has been asking questions about your psychological state and your intentions after graduation," Kyle said. Jake wondered why his intentions would matter to anyone besides. Jake Morrison had become something the galaxy had never seen before, and he was just beginning to understand his own capabilities. The final 24 hours of the hunt simulation began with Jake holding a commanding lead that defied every prediction. The Academy had made 53 enemy eliminations, placed him more than double the previous record, with half the simulation time remaining. But Jake was not thinking about records. He was thinking about the remaining enemy forces and how to eliminate them with maximum efficiency. The AI command structure had adapted to Jake's previous tactics, and enemy patrols were now moving in larger groups, with more sophisticated communication protocols. Jake studied the new patterns and realized that the simulation designers had programmed adaptive responses that would challenge even experienced military officers. Most cadets would have considered this increased difficulty a serious problem. Jake considered it an interesting puzzle. He had been learning about the AI behavioral patterns for 36 hours, and he understood their decision-making processes better than their original programmers. The key to defeating adaptive AI was to give it information that would cause it to make predictable mistakes. Jake began implementing what he privately called psychological warfare against artificial intelligence. He created false evidence of human group movements that would draw enemy forces toward prepared killing grounds. He manipulated communication intercepts to make the AI believe that multiple human teams were operating in areas where Jake was actually working. Alone, most importantly, Jake began using the eliminated enemy equipment to impersonate Korthak forces and redirect AI units toward specific locations. The Academy monitoring staff watched Jake's activities with growing amazement. "Morrison is conducting information warfare against the simulation AI," reported Dr. Chen. "He is feeding false data into the enemy command network, Commander." Vex studied the tactical displays and realized that Jake was treating the entire simulation as a single opponent rather than a collection of individual enemies. "How is his physical condition?" she asked. "Biometric data shows elevated but stable stress indicators." Dr. Chen replied, "His endurance levels remain within acceptable ranges despite continuous activity for 36 hours. Commander Vex compared Jake's data with information from other cadets and found significant differences. Most cadets showed declining performance after 24 hours of simulation. Stress. Jake's performance was actually improving as the simulation continued. Lieutenant Hayes, what is Morrison's current location?" "Central Desert region, approximately 12 kilometers from his original drop point," Hayes replied. "He has been operating within a relatively small area, but his influence extends across the entire simulation zone." Commander Vex realized that Jake had established a territory and was defending it like a true predator. Other cadets were still focused on survival, while Jake was focused on dominance. The simulation AI had reached the same conclusion and was beginning to concentrate all available forces for a coordinated assault on Jake's operational area. Jake detected the enemy movement patterns and understood that the final phase was beginning. Instead of preparing defensive positions, Jake began moving toward the enemy. Concentration. Most military doctrine emphasized the importance of defensive preparation when facing superior numbers. Jake had studied enough human military history to know that the best defense was often an unexpected offense. He had also learned something important about himself during the previous 36 hours. Jake Morrison was very good at killing. The realization should have troubled him, but instead it felt like discovering a natural talent he had never known he possessed. Jake approached the enemy concentration with the patience of a persistence hunter and the tactical awareness of someone who had been born for warfare. He had eliminated 61 enemy combatants, and the AI was treating him as the primary threat in the simulation. Jake found this recognition satisfying rather than concerning. Enemy force consisted of approximately 40 remaining units organized into coordinated assault groups. Any reasonable military analysis would conclude that Jake was outnumbered and should retreat to a more defensible position. Jake decided to eliminate all 40 units in a single coordinated operation. He spent 4 hours preparing the battlefield using environmental hazards, improvised explosive devices, and carefully positioned equipment from previously eliminated enemies. Jake had discovered that Korthak military gear could be reprogrammed to function as automated weapons systems. He created a network of cross-supporting defensive positions that would channel enemy forces into predetermined kill zones. But Jake's real advantage was not technological. His real advantage was that the AI was programmed to expect rational behavior from its opponents. Jake's plan was not rational by conventional military standards. It was the product of a human mind that had fully embraced its capacity for persistence. Hunting and strategic violence, Jake positioned himself at the center of the enemy approach route and began broadcasting surrender signals. The AI interpreted Jake's signals as evidence that the human threat had been neutralized through superior tactical pressure. Enemy forces moved toward Jake's position with the confidence of predators approaching defeated prey. Jake waited until the enemy concentration was exactly where he wanted them. Then he triggered the most complex ambush in Academy simulation history. 41 enemy units were eliminated in a coordinated sequence that lasted less than 10 minutes. The Academy monitoring staff watched in stunned silence as Jake's elimination count jumped from 61 to 102. How is that possible? Dr. Chen asked, while reviewing the tactical data commander. Vex studied the elimination sequence and realized that Jake had used enemy equipment to create an automated killing field. Morrison reprogrammed captured enemy systems to function as an integrated weapons network, she said. He turned their own technology against them. Lieutenant Hayes checked the simulation parameters. Commander, there are only 3 enemy units remaining in the entire simulation zone, Commander. Vex realized that Jake had effectively won a 48-hour survival exercise in 38 hours. But Jake was not finished. The 3 remaining enemy units were command elements that had been positioned outside the main operational area. Jake could have simply avoided them and completed the simulation with a record-breaking score. Instead, Jake began hunting them individually. The Academy staff realized that Jake was not content with winning. He wanted to achieve complete enemy elimination. Morrison is attempting something that has never been accomplished in Academy history, Commander Vex said. He is trying to eliminate every enemy unit in the simulation. Jake spent the remaining 10 hours of the simulation tracking down the 3 command units. Each elimination required different tactics because the AI had learned to adapt to Jake's previous methods. Jake found that he enjoyed the challenge of developing new approaches for each target. The final enemy unit was eliminated with 2 hours. Remaining in the simulation timeline, Jake Morrison had achieved total enemy elimination while maintaining perfect survival status. 105 enemy combatants eliminated over 46 hours, 0 human casualties. The previous Academy record had been 23 eliminations. Jake had eliminated more enemies than the 5 best previous cadets combined. When the simulation ended, Jake felt genuinely disappointed that the hunt was over. The extraction team found Jake calmly organizing equipment. From his final target, he showed no signs of the exhaustion that typically affected cadets after extended simulation stress. Cadet Morrison. "How do you feel?" asked Dr. Martinez, the Academy's chief medical officer. Jake considered the question seriously. "I feel like I finally understand what I am supposed to be doing," he replied. Commander Vex conducted Jake's post-simulation debriefing personally. "Morrison, your performance has exceeded every Academy standard by unprecedented margins," she said. "I need to understand how you achieved these results." Jake tried to explain his approach, but realized that most of his decisions had been based on instincts rather than conscious planning. "I stopped thinking about survival and started thinking about hunting," he said, finally. Commander Vex studied Jake's calm expression and recognized something that made her uneasy. "Morrison, do you understand that this was a simulation with artificial enemies?" Jake nodded. "In actual combat, you would be eliminating living beings rather than AI constructs." Jake considered this information. "Would that change the tactical requirements?" he asked. Commander Vex realized that Jake was asking a purely practical question without any emotional considerations. "No, Morrison. The tactical requirements would be essentially the same." Jake nodded as if that settled the matter. "Then I do not think it would be a problem." Commander Vex made extensive notes in Jake's file and forwarded her report to Galactic Military Command. With the highest priority classification, Jake Morrison had demonstrated capabilities that required immediate attention from the highest levels of military leadership. The galaxy's most dangerous species had just revealed that they were far more dangerous than anyone had suspected. The transport ship carried 200 cadets toward the hunt simulation, and Jake Morrison felt more calm than he had since arriving at the Academy. Around him, other cadets checked weapons and armor while discussing strategies for the 48-hour survival exercise. Kyle Peterson sat with a group of human cadets who had formed an alliance based on species similarity and shared training methods. Lisa Garcia was reviewing environmental data on her tablet while sitting next to Jake in the quieter section of the transport. "The simulation area covers 100 square miles of mixed terrain," Lisa said quietly. "Desert, mountains, forest, and wetlands with active weather systems." Jake nodded while studying the topographical maps. Lisa had downloaded enemy combatants are AI-controlled warriors based on actual Korthak military units. Lisa continued. "They have standard equipment and predictable patrol patterns." Jake noticed that most cadets were focusing on direct combat strategies, while he was more interested in understanding the environment itself. The Korthak hunting preserves had been designed as training grounds for one of the galaxy's most effective military forces. Everything about the terrain and enemy placement was intended to create maximum challenge for conventional military thinking. Jake suspected that conventional thinking might not be the best approach. Commander Zara Vex addressed the cadets over the transport's communication system. "The objective is simple survival and enemy elimination." Her voice carried the authority of someone who had survived actual combat. "You will be evaluated on total enemy combatants, eliminated individual survival time, and tactical effectiveness." Jake listened while other cadets focused on the elimination requirements. Previous Academy records show a maximum of 23 enemy eliminations by a single cadet. Commander Vex continued. Most successful cadets eliminate between 8 and 15 enemies while maintaining survival for the full 48 hours. Jake wondered why the numbers were so low compared to the total enemy force present in the simulation. Lisa seemed to read his thoughts. Most cadets spend their time avoiding enemies rather than hunting them, she whispered. The simulation is designed to reward survival over aggression. Jake realized that the Academy's approach was based on military doctrine that emphasized caution and group tactics. But Jake had been thinking about the simulation differently. Instead of trying to survive among predators, Jake was wondering what would happen if he became the predator. The transport reached the simulation area, and cadets began their individual drops. Jake watched through the viewports, as other cadets were deployed at regular intervals across the 100-square-mile zone. Most cadets requested drops near terrain features that offered immediate shelter and defensive positions. Jake requested a drop in an area that other cadets had. Avoided, the central desert region offered little immediate shelter, but it provided clear sight lines and multiple escape routes. As Jake's drop pod descended toward the surface, he felt something he had never experienced before. The excitement of a hunt. Jake hit the ground running and immediately disappeared into the landscape. While other cadets were establishing defensive positions and making contact with potential allies, Jake was already moving toward his first target. The enemy AI warriors were programmed to patrol in predictable patterns based on actual Korthak military doctrine. Jake had spent weeks studying Korthak tactics, and he knew their weaknesses better than most Academy instructors. Korthak warriors were aggressive and confident, because they had evolved as apex predators on their home world. They expected enemies to either flee or fight directly, and they were very good at both situations, but they had never encountered humans. Jake's first target was an isolated patrol unit. That was following a standard reconnaissance pattern. Jake spent 2 hours observing their movement and timing before making his move. Instead of attacking the warriors directly, Jake created a trap using the environmental hazards that the simulation designers had placed throughout the area. A carefully timed rock slide eliminated the patrol unit without Jake ever coming into direct contact. The elimination registered on Jake's score, but the AI system did not identify Jake as a threat because no direct combat had occurred. Jake moved to his next target while other cadets were still establishing their base camps. By the end of the first day, Jake had eliminated 12 enemy combatants through environmental manipulation and indirect attacks. The Academy's monitoring station was tracking every cadet's progress, and Jake's numbers were already attracting attention. Cadet Morrison has eliminated 12 enemies without a single direct engagement, reported Lieutenant Hayes, who was monitoring. The simulation commander Vex studied Jake's tracking data with interest. "Show me his movement patterns," she ordered. The tactical display showed Jake's path through the simulation area, and Commander Vex realized that Jake was not randomly hunting. "Targets! He is herding them," she said with surprise. "Morrison is manipulating enemy movement patterns to create elimination opportunities." Back in the simulation, Jake was learning things about himself that he had never suspected. The predatory instincts that Dr. Venthara had identified were becoming fully active. Jake found that he could predict enemy behavior with uncanny accuracy. He could sense the best locations for ambushes, and he knew exactly when to move and when to wait. More importantly, Jake discovered that he enjoyed the hunt. Other cadets were focused on survival, and they treated enemy elimination as a necessary but dangerous requirement. Jake treated enemy elimination as the primary objective and survival as a useful side effect. By the end of the first 24 hours, Jake had eliminated 37 enemy combatants. The previous Academy record was 23 total eliminations over 48 hours. Jake had broken the record and still had 24 hours remaining. Other cadets were beginning to notice unusual patterns in enemy behavior. Kyle Peterson's group had established a defensive position in a mountain valley, but their expected enemy contacts were not materializing. "Something is wrong with the enemy distribution," Kyle reported to his team. "We should have seen twice as many patrols by now." Lisa Garcia was having similar experiences in her chosen forest territory. The AI enemies that should have been patrolling her area seemed to be moving toward the central desert region. What the other cadets did not realize was that Jake had been systematically eliminating enemy units and using their communication protocols to redirect surviving forces. Jake had studied Korthak communication methods and learned how to send false reports that would confuse the AI command structure by manipulating enemy communications. Jake was drawing more targets toward his hunting ground, while reducing pressure on other cadets. The Academy monitoring staff was struggling to understand what they were observing. "Morrison's elimination rate is unprecedented," reported Dr. Chen, the simulation's technical supervisor, "but his methods are unlike anything in our tactical databases." Commander Vex watched Jake's real-time position data and realized that he was moving with the confidence of someone who had complete control over his environment. "How many enemy units remain in the simulation?" she asked. "Approximately 60% of original forces," Dr. Chen replied, "but most of them are concentrated in Morrison's operational area." Commander Vex understood what was happening. Jake was not just hunting individual targets. He was restructuring the entire simulation to maximize his hunting efficiency. Other cadets were surviving by avoiding contact while Jake was thriving by seeking it. Lieutenant Hayes contacted the other human cadets and asked for their assessment of Morrison's psychological state. Lieutenant Hayes relayed the request and received responses from Kyle Peterson and Lisa Garcia. Peterson reports that Morrison seemed unusually calm before the simulation began. Hayes reported, "Garcia states that Morrison has been exhibiting increased confidence and tactical awareness over the past month." Commander Vex realized that the Academy had severely underestimated human potential. Jake Morrison was not just succeeding despite being the smallest cadet. He was succeeding because his small size and unassuming appearance allowed him to approach warfare from a completely different perspective. The simulation entered its final 24 hours, and Jake had eliminated 53 enemy combatants. The Academy staff was no longer tracking his progress as a routine evaluation. They were documenting what appeared to be the emergence of a completely new form of combat effectiveness. Jake had become something that no one had expected a human who had fully embraced his species' capacity for persistence hunting and strategic elimination of threats. The galaxy was about to learn that humans were far more dangerous than anyone had realized. Jake Morrison discovered that Academy training was designed to break cadets in the most efficient way possible. The first week of physical conditioning left him exhausted and sore in places he did not know existed. Instructor Kethavol was a Vrixian, whose exoskeleton gleamed under the training facility lights and whose compound eyes missed nothing. During combat drills, Jake found himself paired against opponents who outweighed him by 200 pounds and had natural weapons he could never Match a Fenrari cadet named Razor knocked Jake unconscious during their first sparring session, and the medical bay became Jake's second home. Kyle Peterson watched these sessions with the expression of someone whose worst predictions were coming. "True. Morrison, you are going to get yourself killed," Kyle said, after Jake returned from his third medical visit in 4 days. Lisa Garcia had a different perspective when she visited Jake in the medical bay. "Stop trying to fight them the way they want to fight," she said, while Jake held an ice pack against his ribs. "What do you mean?" Jake asked through gritted teeth. "You are trying to match strength against strength and speed against speed," Lisa explained. "That is not how humans won their place in this galaxy." Jake wondered what Lisa meant because the official histories he had read made human military success sound like superior technology and better organization. Humans did not conquer other species through direct confrontation. Lisa continued, "We won because we were unpredictable and we never gave up." Over the following days, Jake started paying attention to things other cadets ignored. He noticed that Altarians were incredibly strong, but their reaction time slowed significantly. In cold environments, Vrixians had perfect coordination, but their compound eyes created blind spots that could be exploited. Fenrari were fast and aggressive, but they tired quickly during extended conflicts. Jake began spending his free time in the Academy Library researching every species represented in his class. The database contained millions of files about alien biology, psychology, and combat histories. Most cadets ignored this information because they assumed physical training was more important than academic preparation. Jake read about how different species approached warfare and what psychological factors influenced their decision-making. Altarians valued honor above tactical advantage and would often choose difficult paths over easier alternatives. Vrixians operated through collective decision-making, which made them slow to adapt to unexpected situations. Fenrari pack dynamics meant they became confused and ineffective when separated from their group members. Jake also researched human military history and found information that had never been included in his colonial education. Humans had fought wars on Earth for thousands of years before joining the galactic community. They had developed strategies for defeating larger, stronger opponents through patience, persistence, and psychological manipulation. Human endurance was legendary among terrestrial species, but other galactic races had never encountered anything like it. Most alien conflicts lasted hours or days. While humans had fought wars that continued for years or decades, Jake started applying this knowledge during training sessions. Instead of trying to overpower his opponents, Jake focused on wearing them down through extended engagements. He learned to take hits and keep fighting while his opponents expected quick victories. Instructor Kethval noticed the change during a combat simulation, where Jake managed to survive against a Altarian opponent for over an hour. "Cadet Morrison, your combat effectiveness has not improved significantly," the instructor said, "but your survival time has increased by 400%. Jake realized that survival time might be more important than winning individual battles. Lisa Garcia became his primary training partner because she understood what Jake was trying to accomplish. "Humans are persistence hunters," she explained during one of their practice sessions. "We do not need to be faster than our prey. We just need to be able to keep going after they get tired." They developed training routines based on endurance rather than strength. While other cadets focused on maximum lift capacity, Jake and Lisa worked on maintaining steady performance over extended periods, while others practiced explosive speed. Jake practiced consistent movement that could be maintained for hours. The Academy's training facility had environmental controls that could simulate different planetary conditions. Jake discovered that humans adapted to environmental changes. Faster than most other species, Altarians suffered in high humidity conditions. While Jake barely noticed the difference, Vrixians became sluggish in low-oxygen environments that Jake found merely uncomfortable. Fenrari could not function effectively. In temperatures that Jake considered mildly warm, Jake began requesting training time in different environmental conditions. He practiced combat techniques in low gravity, high gravity, extreme temperatures, and reduced atmosphere. Other cadets avoided these conditions because they were unpleasant, but Jake found that discomfort was something he could ignore better than most beings. Kyle Peterson noticed Jake's unconventional training methods, and his attitude began to shift. Morrison, what exactly are you trying to prove? Kyle asked during a break between training sessions. I am trying to figure out how to not get killed, Jake replied honestly. Kyle studied Jake with a more thoughtful expression than he had shown before. You know, Morrison, when I first met you, I thought you were just another colonial who did not understand what he was getting into. Jake waited for Kyle to continue. But you are not trying to be something you are not. Kyle said, you are trying to be better at being what you already are. Jake had never thought about it that way, but Kyle's observation made sense. Instead of trying to become a different kind of person, Jake was trying to become a better version of himself. The Academy's psychological evaluation sessions were mandatory for all cadets. Jake sat across from Dr. Venthera, an Altarian counselor whose blue scales seemed to shift color based on her emotional state. Cadet Morrison, your psychological profile contains some unusual elements, Dr. Venthera said while reviewing Jake's test results. Jake wondered if unusual meant he was about to be dismissed from the Academy. Your empathy scores are within normal human ranges, but your predatory instinct ratings are significantly elevated. Jake did not know what that meant. Most humans score low on predatory instinct measures because your species is classified as primarily herbivorous with omnivorous tendencies. Dr. Venthara showed Jake a comparison chart. Your scores are more consistent with species that evolved as apex predators. Jake looked at the chart and saw that his numbers were similar to Fenrari and other species known for their hunting abilities. Is that good or bad? Jake asked. It is unusual, Dr. Venthara replied. Most herbivorous species develop cooperative social structures and avoid direct confrontation. The counselor made notes on her datapad. Your profile suggests someone who is capable of extended planning, patient observation, and strategic elimination of threats, Jake wondered if those qualities would help him survive the Academy. The interesting thing about your results is that they indicate latent capabilities rather than developed skills. Dr. Venthara looked at Jake with curiosity. You have never had reason to develop these instincts fully, but they are present in your psychological makeup. Jake left the counseling session with more questions than answers. That evening, Lisa Garcia found him in the library researching human psychological profiles. Dr. Venthara told you about the predatory instinct scores, Lisa said. Jake nodded and wondered how Lisa knew about his session. She told me the same thing about my results, Lisa explained. Apparently, colonial humans score higher than Earth humans on those measures. Jake wondered why that might be true. Maybe because colonial life requires different survival skills, Lisa suggested. We grow up in environments where resources are limited and threats are unpredictable. Jake thought about his childhood. On the farming colonies, Every decision his family made was about long-term survival rather than immediate comfort. They planned years in advance and they never wasted resources because waste meant death. Maybe those experiences had shaped him in ways he did not fully understand. Jake spent the next several days thinking about predatory instincts and what they might mean. He watched other species during combat training and noticed patterns in their behavior. Most aliens fought like they expected. Quick, decisive battles. They used overwhelming force when they had advantages and retreated when they faced superior opposition. Jake realized that his instinct was different. He preferred to observe and wait for the right moment, rather than rushing into confrontation. When he did fight, he focused on targets that would create maximum psychological impact rather than immediate tactical advantage. Lisa noticed the change in Jake's approach during their training sessions. "You are not just trying to survive anymore," she observed. "You are starting to think like a hunter." Jake wondered if that was what Dr. Vanthera had meant about latent capabilities becoming developed skills. The Academy announced the final examination schedule, and Jake saw that the hunt simulation was listed for the end of the semester. Instructor Keth Voll explained the simulation during their tactical warfare class. The hunt simulation is based on actual conditions from the Korthak hunting preserves, the instructor said. 48 hours of survival on a hostile environment with active enemy forces. Jake Morrison stood at the entrance of Galactic Military Academy Station Omega-7 and felt smaller than he had ever felt in his entire life. The transport ship had been cramped with 200 cadets from 47 different species. But Jake had still managed to find a corner where nobody noticed him much. Now, as he walked through the massive doors that were built for beings 3 times his size, he realized that being unnoticed might become impossible. The ceiling stretched up so high that Jake could barely make out the lights, and the corridors were wide enough for 10 humans to walk side by side. A group of Altarian cadets walked past him, and their blue scales caught the artificial sunlight streaming through the station windows. The smallest one among them was still 8 feet tall, and when one of them looked down at Jake, the expression on the alien face was something between confusion and amusement. Jake pulled his standard-issue duffel bag higher on his shoulder and kept walking. He had memorized the station layout during the 3-week journey from Earth, but seeing it in person was completely different. Everything was built for giants, and Jake was definitely not a giant. At 5 feet and 4 inches tall, Jake Morrison was the shortest human in his family, and apparently he was about to become the shortest cadet in the academy. His roommate assignment said Dorm Block C Room 47, and Jake hoped whoever he was sharing space with would not step on him by accident. Corridors filled with more cadets as Jake walked deeper into the station. Massive insectoid Vrixians clicked and buzzed as they moved in perfect formation. Their exoskeletons gleamed like polished metal, and their compound eyes tracked movement with mechanical precision. A pack of wolf-like Fenrari cadets loped past with their silver fur bristling and their yellow eyes scanning everything around them. Jake pressed himself against the wall to let them pass and noticed that even on all fours they were taller than him. Room 47 was exactly where the map said it would be, but the door was twice as tall as any door Jake had seen on Earth. He pressed his palm against the scanner and heard the lock click open. Inside the room, Jake found his bunk assignment and realized that what the academy called a standard bunk was more like a small apartment back home. His roommate had already arrived, and Jake could tell because there was a pile of equipment that would have filled his entire bedroom back on the farming colony. The other bunk belonged to Kyle Peterson, according to the nameplate. and Jake recognized the name from the human cadet roster. Kyle was from Mars and came from a family of military officers going back 4 generations. Jake had read about the Peterson family during his preparation for academy admission. They were heroes of the Titan campaign and the asteroid belt conflicts. Kyle had probably been training for military service since he could walk, while Jake had spent most of his childhood helping his parents grow crops in the outer colonies. The door hissed open and Kyle Peterson walked in. Jake had been right about the military training because Kyle moved like someone who had been born in a uniform. Kyle was also 6 feet and 2 inches tall, with the kind of build that came from years of proper nutrition and professional fitness training. When Kyle saw Jake, he stopped walking, and his expression went from neutral to disappointed in about 2 seconds. "You must be the other human," Kyle said, and his tone made it clear that Jake was not what he had been hoping for. Jake nodded and tried to think of something to say that would not sound completely pathetic. "Jake Morrison from the Kepler Colony Farms," he said, and immediately regretted mentioning the farming part. Kyle looked Jake up and down like he was evaluating livestock and clearly found the results lacking. "Kyle Peterson from Mars Military Academy." Kyle said, "I was hoping they would pair me with someone who might actually make it through the first month." Jake felt his face getting hot, but he kept his expression neutral. He had learned that skill during years of dealing with bigger kids who thought farm colony children were easy targets. "Plan to make it through all 4 years," Jake said quietly. Kyle laughed, and the sound was not particularly friendly. "Look, Morrison, I am sure you are a nice guy, but this is not like farming where you can take your time and hope things work out." Kyle dropped his gear on his bunk and continued talking. "The Academy has a 40% dropout rate in the first semester, and that is just from academic pressure." Kyle pulled out a data pad and showed Jake some statistics. Physical training eliminates. Another 20% and combat simulation removes most of the rest. Jake looked at the numbers and felt something cold settle in his stomach. The instructors here are not interested in being fair or giving everyone a chance. Kyle went on, "They are looking for the best of the best because that is what wins wars." Jake nodded like he understood, but inside his mind was working on a different problem. He was trying to figure out why Kyle was telling him all this. Either Kyle was trying to be helpful in a really discouraging way, or Kyle was trying to get Jake to quit before they both got in trouble. "Thanks for the information," Jake said. "I will keep it in mind." Kyle shrugged and started unpacking his equipment. Jake watched Kyle pull out training gear that looked like it cost more than Jake's family made in a year. Advanced combat armor designed for human physiology and weapons that Jake had only seen in military documentaries, personal fitness equipment that could simulate any gravity condition, and nutritional supplements that were probably illegal in civilian markets. Jake opened his own duffel bag and pulled out the standard issue items that the Academy had provided, basic clothes and basic equipment, and a data pad that was 3 generations behind Kyle's model. The contrast was pretty obvious, and Kyle noticed it immediately. "First time off-world?" Kyle asked, but his tone made it clear that he already knew the answer. "First time off-planet," Jake confirmed. "First time in space, actually." Kyle nodded, like that explained everything about Jake that needed explaining. "The Academy gets a lot of colonial applicants who think military service is just like the adventure stories they read." Kyle finished unpacking and started organizing his area with military precision. "Most of them wash out when they realize that real combat is nothing like the simulations they played back home." Jake wondered if Kyle was trying to discourage him or just stating facts. Either way Jake was getting the message that Kyle did not expect him to last very long. The evening meal was served in a dining hall that could have held every person Jake had ever met with, room left over for a few hundred more. Jake got his food from servers, who were clearly designed for beings much larger than humans. The portions were huge, and Jake suspected that what the Academy considered a single serving would feed his family for a week. He found an empty table near the back of the hall and sat down to eat. The food was actually pretty good, but Jake was more interested in watching the other cadets. 200 beings from 47 species, and every single one of them looked like they belonged here, except him. The Altarians moved with fluid grace, and their conversation sounded like music. The Vrixians ate with mechanical efficiency, and their compound eyes tracked everything happening around them. The Fenrari tore into their meat with enthusiasm, and their pack dynamics were obvious. Even to someone who had never seen their species before, Jake was still watching and learning when someone sat down across from him. It was a human female with short brown hair and intelligent brown eyes. "You must be the other colonial," she said with a slight smile. "I am Lisa Garcia from the Europa Science Stations." Jake introduced himself and felt relieved to be talking with someone who did not immediately write him off. Lisa was about average height for a human female, and she had the kind of practical build that came from growing up in low-gravity environments. "I have been watching you watch everyone else," Lisa said. "Good habit for someone who wants to survive here?" Jake realized that Lisa had been doing the same thing he was doing, learning about the competition by observation rather than direct confrontation. "Kyle Peterson told me that most colonials wash out in the first month," Jake said. Lisa nodded and took a bite of her food before answering. "Kyle Peterson is probably right about the statistics, but he is wrong about the reasons." Lisa looked around the dining hall and then back at Jake. "Most colonials fail because they try to compete on the same terms as everyone else instead of figuring out their own advantages." Jake wondered what advantages someone like him could possibly have in a place like this. Lisa seemed to read his thoughts because she smiled again. "You know what I noticed about you, Jake Morrison from the Kepler farming colonies?" Jake shook his head. "You have been in this dining hall for 20 minutes, and you have identified the social structure of 6 different species without talking to anyone." Lisa pointed toward a table of Altarians. "You figured out their hierarchy based on scale coloration and seating arrangement." Then she pointed toward the Vrixian table. "You identified their communication patterns by watching their antenna movements." Jake realized that Lisa was right, but he had not been conscious of doing any of that. Most people see aliens, and just see aliens. Lisa continued. "You see individuals with patterns and behaviors that can be predicted and used." Jake felt something shift in his understanding of his situation. Maybe being small and unnoticed was not just a disadvantage. Maybe it was also an opportunity.